You're listening to the Platte River Bard.
Hello, and welcome to the Platte River Bard. This is Chris Berger.
And I'm Sherry Berger.
And we are here today with Seth Fox. He is the curator of Musing. And we are also here with Laura Kelly. She is a storyteller in Musing. And we're talking about Musing, a storyteller series. This is Miscellanea, Volume 2. It's coming up on Wednesday, April 19th at 7:30 p.m. at the Bluebarn Theater, of course. Now, we've talked to Seth before about Musing. I think this is our very first time talking with Laura as at least a storyteller from Musing. And welcome, both of you, on this early Easter morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
We are excited for this. We've been with Seth since the beginning of this project, and it has taken off. It's been successful pretty much ever since when you started it, and you started it during the pandemic as well. And I'm so happy that it's been so successful for you. And right now you're doing Miscellanea Part 2. So you've already done a Miscellanea Part 1. And now you're doing the Part 2. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Miscellanea series?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first season of Musing, we staged 4 different events. Each event had its own specific theme. For example, our first event, the theme was Music, Movies, and Me, stories about the music and movies that shape us. Everyone has a favorite movie, a favorite song, a favorite album, etc., that maybe is the soundtrack for a very pivotal moment in their life or a special era of their life, or just a movie that, you know, for one reason or another, maybe they identified with, etc. That just seemed like a really logical way to launch the series because it's something everyone can relate to, right? And so with those themes in place, audiences could show up. They kind of had an idea as to, you know, the types of stories they were going to hear, which was great. And had a lot of people, respond to the call. And we had a lot of stories submitted, and it was wonderful. I was able to book the entire season basically within the first couple of months of the series, which was really exciting. And then I thought, well, we should be casting a wider net, because think about all the stories that are out there that don't fit these themes specifically. And so I thought, hey, why not just throw a kind of a general call out there and see what kind of hits we get. And it's been incredible. People have stories that they want to tell about a variety of different subjects. But the trick this season is we're not letting the audience really in on the themes that we're going to be covering or exploring. So that's been kind of fun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a surprise.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the process that you and Laura and the other storytellers go through to be able to create that story into something that is even more engaging and is easier to tell. How does that process go to pick the stories and to actually direct them in such a way that they can remember it and it's told in an interesting way?
Well, Laura, for example, she submitted her pitch via email, which is how I think 99% of the pitches come in is via email. And Laura, I think you also had a link to a video that you had made. Is that right? Or was it a TED Talk?
Yeah,
what was it?
I had told my story a couple years ago. I was interviewed by a group that was collecting stories for the specific cardiac condition that I have. And so that had been recorded for posting on their website and was shared on YouTube. And so I had sent you that. It was kind of an interview format, but it gave you an idea of what my story would be if chosen for the project.
Right. So then once that was submitted, I watched the video. It was very compelling. It was a topic that or a theme that we had never explored. And so I was fascinated by it from the get-go. And then Laura and I had a conversation via Zoom about it, and I was sold. She tells her story very, very well. She's very articulate, and also you have this sense of humor, Laura, that really appeals to me. It's kind of a wry sense of humor, and so. But maybe you can talk more about the process after that, after you were selected to be part of Musing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a really interesting process for me. My background in quote performance is I do community theater occasionally, and I was driving
Okay.
to work and heard Seth talking about the project on an NPR. I think Mike Hogan, Live and Local,
Yeah.
I believe it was, and
Yeah.
I was really drawn to just experiencing a new way to share with an audience, and I'd never tried storytelling, and so I was like, well, I have a story that was a pretty big deal that maybe would be what Seth is looking for. So the process of working with Seth has just been really fascinating to me from the standpoint of it's very different from other types of performances because it's a personal story. I tend to be a very verbal person, and when I write with a lot of description. And so, just that process of working through writing the story and then figuring out how to translate that into telling the story has been really interesting because how I might write it to share for someone to read is actually different than how I would write it to share verbally. And so that's been a really neat process. It's been good for me even as a writer to hone in on getting rid of the extraneous details and presenting it in a way that can draw the audience into my experience. And I feel like Seth has really helped me a lot with that. Has always affirmed to me that it's my story, and any suggestions that he makes to me, I can either take or leave, which is really nice. But it has been really a neat experience for me to tweak it over the months that we've worked on it, and I think I finally have it in a format that I'm really excited to share.
Now, you said you wrote this, of course. Is this, have you had a lot of experience with writing before, or was this sort of your first big sort of writing project?
I mean, I've always liked to write. I haven't done any writing
Hmm.
professionally necessarily. Back in the day when blogging was a thing, I had a blog for my
Ah,
teaching, my Montessori classroom that I wrote for quite a while. So I mean, I like to write, but it's definitely not
okay.
something I do professionally. So
Sure.
writing a story, a personal story, with the intention of sharing it is
Yeah.
a newer thing for me.
I'm curious, do you journal for yourself on a regular basis? Is that kind of, does that keep you in practice, or is
Honestly,
it
I don't. I'm
is it
kind of a journaling wannabe, but
ah
it never takes. What I tend to do is the writing that I do have done the most frequently over my adult life is when there's like something that that is a very emotional experience for me. I tend to write poetry around that, but that's very
Hmm.
sporadic. It's kind of at those moments where I've experienced loss or angst or grief where it tends to want to pour out of me in a poetic form. So nope, I'm not a journaler.
so how did this whole process go for you as far as verbalizing it? So is this basically a script that you've written and Seth has helped you kind of make it more accurate to the way that you want to perform it, or how does that process go, the actual performing process?
Well, I think I'll share my perspective, and I'm guessing Seth might want to jump in. From the beginning, Seth said that storytellers have different ways that they pull together their story in preparation for performing it. And some prefer to write it out like you would be, writing sentence after paragraph, and some may have a different format. For me, it made sense to write it out like a story. And so I did that and shared it with Seth,
Okay.
and he gave me feedback. And then we had a couple of rehearsals, just the two of us virtually, where I would read or present the story and make tweaks over time. And so I don't think of it as much of it as a script, but for me, having it written out just helped me get my thoughts straight. And for my story in particular, the chronological sequence of it, there's an interesting aspect to that because of how I experienced the story. And so helping Seth and I really worked hard on figuring out what part of the story to tell when, because not to share too much, but I had a pretty
Sure.
traumatic health event. It was a full cardiac arrest caused by a condition that I didn't know I had. Um, And there's a lot of this story that I don't personally remember because it had to be told to me because I wasn't conscious to remember it. So figuring out how to tell that and sequence that was something we worked pretty hard on figuring out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is different for each storyteller. I marvel at the storytellers who consistently tell their story each time we rehearse, but then tell me, oh, I've just got these bullet points in my head and I just know where to go, like mile markers. I know where to go next.
Oh, wow.
Because that's just not the way I'm built or wired. And I think maybe, I'm more the same style, I approach it with the same style as Laura does. I have to write it out. And I think part of that too is just being, raised as a theater kid too, is that it helps me if I can almost look at it as a monologue. But the trick of that is, as Laura was saying, it's really, really easy to get caught up in maybe the sentiment of it or editorializing or, and it kind of, the story then kind of digresses into more of an essay, if you kind of go off the rails that way. Okay. But really it's just about sticking to the action versus stating your opinion or your conclusion, of maybe that you've arrived at in hindsight, but Laura is a very gifted writer, and I do encourage her to write because she really does have a very specific, very conversational narrative voice, and that translates so well into the way that she tells her story because you would never know that it was written down. It's just she's using the language that Laura uses when she speaks, and that's a talent.
Yeah, and you've got 3 other storytellers, so you'll be doing 4 stories. So what is next for you on this? So you've gone with this Miscellanea. Is that going to continue the intrigue, the mystique and intrigue of the stories, or?
I like the idea of sort of keeping it under wraps. I really like that idea a lot. I am finding that there is definitely a hunger for storytelling in Omaha, and there are different storytelling groups in Omaha that I've reached out to for sort of, cross promotion purposes. But storytelling, I thought coming into this, being a fan of the Moth Radio Hour, which is sort of, the staple, which is sort of the standard, that storytelling had to be sort of presented in a certain way, and that storytelling had to check certain boxes, and that there had to be a certain structure to it. But what I'm finding is that's just not the case. There are people who have a story about an occurrence, which is great, almost like a Raymond Carver story where it's almost just this snapshot, and there's it's told in a linear fashion, but you're kind of dropped into the action, and at the end you're left with a sort of conclusion, but there's still some what ifs and there's still some questions lingering, and then there are stories that sort of span an entire era in someone's life, maybe covering years, versus just a specific occurrence. Right. Everybody has their own idea of what a story is and what it sounds like. And I've learned to just really step away and just allow the storyteller to approach their story, in their own fashion and staying true to their own style. Like Laura said, I'm not heavy-handed. I want them to always remember that they have ownership of their story. Right. Musing just gives them a platform. Musing just, I think we can all agree that this is becoming more and more true, that when we're in conversation, many of us have forgotten that we're having a conversation in order to understand one another versus waiting for a beat so that we can reply. Yes. And, and musing allows somebody 10 to 15 minutes on a stage in front of 100 strangers, to just be heard,
right?
And connections are still made that way. Like my mom likes to say, she hasn't missed one event, and they come all the way from Grand Island for them, but she says, when we're in the midst of that event, I feel like I'm sitting in a room with 100 of my closest friends, but perfect strangers, because there's just this connection that's established.
That's really neat.
All of this to say, I don't know what the future holds for Musing, but I do know after having done 2 seasons of it, I have a better understanding of what storytelling is,
Nice.
and what it can be, and what it doesn't necessarily have to be, and letting go of that idea that it has to be like the moth, and it has to. It doesn't.
Right.
It definitely doesn't. I think that trying to hold the project up to that standard, I think maybe in some ways that might keep people from pitching. Maybe my story's not good enough.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not what you're looking for, or whatever. And again, all that to say, I have no idea what the future holds for it. I would love to do another season. Where we go with it, who knows?
Sky's the limit.
For sure.
Sky's the limit.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I learn a lot from the storytellers too about what direction to take it in. Yeah.
And I would think that this process makes the storyteller even learn more about themselves, and as well. Maybe there's something that comes out that they didn't even realize they weren't acknowledging consciously. But after they're putting the story together for someone else to listen to, they find maybe another piece of something they weren't thinking about.
Did you experience that, Laura? Have you experienced that?
My story involves a very catastrophic, potentially, life-ending health event. And I have told the factual pieces of that story over time, just incidentally, coworkers or whatever. And what I've recognized is that I almost have I've had this emotional distance from it when I tell the story, like, oh yeah, this kind of big deal thing happened to me, but I'm fine. And I think that what has been really cool for me in this process, it's almost, I feel like it's a cathartic process for me almost around this. It's not that I have stuffed emotion around it, but I also feel like I think this will allow the story to have the weight that it truly has in my life by presenting it in this way. I hope I'm articulating that in the way that it's a little hard to articulate, but I feel like this is allowing the story to live in this way is going to be really cathartic for me, and will just acknowledge the story and the significance of it, I guess, is the best way to put it.
And I think to your point, it's one of those things, there are different versions of your story out there, because there's the, meeting my bestie at the coffee shop version. There's the, I'm posting this on Facebook version. There's the, there are all these different, there's the version you're going to write out more in journal form. And then there's the version that you tell in front of a live audience.
Yeah.
I think getting in touch with your emotions is more of the telling my story in front of a live audience. Oddly enough, being so vulnerable, really, though, and exposing yourself in front of it. Well, in matter of speaking,
Emotionally.
There's truly a huge vulnerability to sharing a story. And even if you've had experience on a stage like I have, this is a whole nother thing. And it's funny because I was drawn to it, like I said, because I wanted to experience another way of presenting or performing, or it's not really a performance, but just, another part of that genre of art. And then after I pitched it to Seth, my partner and I were talking, and he's like, this could be really kind of emotional for you. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. As if that didn't even occur to me, because it kind of didn't. But there's definitely vulnerability in presenting any story. And for me in particular, this is probably, I'm sharing some of the most vulnerable parts of the story with strangers, which is, not a small thing, I guess.
No, it's a little scary. Well, and you had mentioned you had talked about it just a little bit before with a different group about your medical event, and but what prompted you to want to come to Seth and the Musing format and say, hey, I would like to tell this story here, or did your partner maybe say, hey, maybe you should do that? Or did a friend or somebody? Or what sort of prompted you to do that?
It was truly a prompting just from hearing that interview that you did with Live and Local, and just being really intrigued by storytelling.
Oh.
And I guess then the first thing that popped in my head was, oh, I have that one thing that happened to me that I could tell.
Right.
That one kind of big deal thing.
It sounds like it could
honestly,
be a big deal. Yeah.
Well, and honestly, I will be honest. I echo what Seth said about people questioning whether their story is, quote, good enough or what you're looking for. I mean, I had no idea really when I pitched it to Seth. I thought, well, it may or may not be something that would fit with what he's looking for. So I didn't know, but I also knew that it was a story that when I do tell it, even in those little, like you said, all those different little ways that you may share the story.
Yeah.
I know from people's feedback that they always react to it pretty significantly, like, oh my gosh, where to me, since it happened to me, I've sort of minimized the oh my gosh factor of it, right?
Sure.
So I thought it might be something that would fit, excuse me, what Seth was looking for, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow.
Interesting. Had you written it out or blogged it out at all before you approached him, or did you just
I really hadn't. Okay. Yeah, I really hadn't. I mean, during February, the Heart Health Month, I usually kind of always share some information, just about it in a pretty general way. But no, to write it out the way that I did for this project, I had not done that ever.
So someone who is interested in doing this it doesn't necessarily, even though a performing arts background like yours, Laura, helps, but they don't necessarily need to have a performing arts background to do this.
Yeah, we tried to make that as clear as possible from the very, very start, that, these are not people getting up and acting. You don't have to be a seasoned public speaker in order to participate in this. And that is still something that I like to remind people of, when we kind of put the call out there for new stories, is, we had a storyteller last season who is a retired pediatrician, and she probably could have told a million different stories just about her experiences as a pediatrician, but there was one story that she had always wanted to tell, and she got up and she told it. And in that sense, she kind of got her fix, and that was it, and she worked on the story for over a year.
Wow.
Because when she originally pitched, her pitch wasn't actually selected for the event that she had pitched for. But we did end up, using her later on that season, because her story was one of those that fit a couple of different themes,
Okay.
And so we were able to use her, later on in the series, and she was outstanding. But again, this will probably be the only time that she gets up and tells this story. Now it's memorialized. We record every performance, and she got to tell the story the way that she wanted to tell it, with a little bit of, tweaking and feedback from me. But yeah, otherwise, no. Pediatrician. She had never done public speaking before, in this sense, But what also I wanted to mention too, earlier we were kind of talking about this. What's really great about this too is that, like Laura said, she's getting up in front of a room full of people and being very, very vulnerable, and opening herself up to these people. And I think I'm sure there are people out there who are like, I could never do that. I could never be so vulnerable in front of other people, or why would anybody want to be that vulnerable in front of other people? Well, let me tell you, it's really interesting, because the way that you view perfect strangers is definitely affected. You can be out in public, passing 100 different people on a busy day down on the old market or a farmer's market or whatever, wherever it may be. And there are 100 different stories passing you by, all of these different experiences, Don't make assumptions just based on outside appearances. Don't make assumptions just based on how somebody looks on a resume. Don't make assumptions just because of the color of someone's skin or their gender, sexual orientation, whatever. There are a million stories floating around out there that kind of level that playing field. We can all connect, and we can all empathize. We can all what's the word I'm looking for here? Relate, I guess.
Yeah.
And it really does. It kind of changes your view of other people. We really are just having a human experience here. We're doing the best we can, for better or for worse.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I love about this storytelling series that you're doing, and I'm so glad that you're continuing it, and it's been so successful, and it's still free, right? There's still the tickets are free, and then you can, if you can't go to it, you can watch it on YouTube, I think. Is it YouTube?
The Bluebarn's YouTube channel. We always post it usually a week or two after the event on the Bluebarn channel. And I mean, the events, they sell out so quickly. But we always have a waiting list at the door the night of the show.
That's great.
And so far we haven't had to turn anybody away. We make room.
That's great.
But yeah, that's just such a good feeling. Just knowing that. Yeah, we're filling every seat. It's standing room only. It's just such a great feeling. Yeah.
Well,
really
I can't imagine as a performer, Laura, of course, you've done performing before. You've worked in theater before, but this is not, the kind of theater I'm sure that you have done before, because it's so very personal, and now that the room's going to be full. And because this is all I'm thinking, this is coming to me as an actor.
I just have to say, I would be terrified.
And I've not done this before, although I think one of these days I'm going to try to write something for this. But we'll see what I pick. But
what would you pick?
I have no idea. But
being a member of the Jolly Rogers.
I can't imagine. I cannot imagine.
That would be good
because it's coming up here within the next couple of weeks. It's April 19th. Does this feel different because you prep for shows before? You know what that's like. You've done that. This has got to feel different as a performer. This has got to feel different approaching this. And I don't know, are you excited about it, or are you sort of nervous about it, or do you know how to feel about it yet?
She wasn't nervous until we asked her if she was going to be nervous.
Or did I just bring up a bunch of stuff that you were trying not to think about?
Now you did it.
No, I think that when I'm speaking about it to friends and family, I am both excited and terrified.
Yeah.
Terrified might be wording it a little strongly, but yeah, I think you absolutely are right. It's very different from, most recently I was in a show in Red Oak. And so that was just a play. I had to memorize lines, it was someone else's script, and, you want to get that right. And you don't want to mess up your cast members by botching your lines. So obviously there's that level of stress for that type of performance.
Sure.
And for this, that part feels a little more relaxed because it's my story. And even though I want to make sure I hit the whole sequence and don't leave anything out, that part feels different and not as stressful, I guess, in terms of memorizing something verbatim, right?
Sure, I can see that.
But I think the thing that feels the scariest part is what we've already talked about, is just being that raw and vulnerable and telling something that just some real vulnerable parts of that story. And it's hard to anticipate right now how that. I think the biggest fear is like, gosh, am I going to lose it emotionally on stage? Which I don't think I will, but yet, I would be shocked if I don't have quite a genuine emotional response.
For sure.
within that storytelling, even though I'm pretty confident I can do it in a way that's not going to disrupt the story. Just the idea of what it's going to bring up, the telling of it to a live audience. Yeah, definitely. That feels like a courageous, brave, and scary thing to do.
It is. It is very much so. Especially a big sort of emotional health event that you may or may not have been able to come out of, but of course you did, because we're talking to you. I would think that would be very difficult to really sort of break it down and be completely honest about everything that did and could have happened.
Well, I really look forward to it. I think it's going to be really, and it always is a really amazing experience to see people and hear people and their stories. So we are wishing you breaking all of the legs, even though it's a real story. So I don't know if that technically counts, but wishing you all the luck. I know it'll go fantastic. And we really appreciate you talking to us today about it, because we're excited for you that this is just going so well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I just appreciate you've been so generous with your time and helping get the word out about musing. I really appreciate that.
Oh, we love it. We love it.
Yes.
We love what you're doing. Thank you.
Absolutely love it.
For doing what creatives do and really bringing something unique to it. So
I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Real people, real stories, and they're writing it themselves with, of course, an amount of help depending on the person from Seth, and maybe a little, maybe a lot. We don't know. And it
depends on the storyteller.
I think it's awesome, and I think it's needed. And like you said, you pass 100 people a day, and you don't know. We never quite think about everything that goes on. And I think this is one of those ways that we can kind of connect with that idea of, you don't know what's going on right below the surface of every single solitary person you pass.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I love the cassette tape that you use for your logo for this.
Yes.
As an 80s child, I appreciate it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, mixtapes were all the rage. I mean,
oh my God, yes.
My best friend and I used to set up, for hours at a time, and we would make mixtapes, and ours were, we tried to make them seamless, and so one song would blend into the other, and they all had a theme. Sometimes they had a theme, sometimes they didn't. And so I sort of thought of Miscellanea as a sort of mixtape.
It's wonderful.
I love it.
So that's where we came up with the graphic. Yeah.
No, I love it. Young people today need to know what that is.
Ye old mixtape, man.
Right?
That's really good.
Right? Yeah.
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much to Seth Fox. Thank you so much to Laura Kelly. Seth Fox, of course, is the curator of musing. And Laura Kelly is, of course, a storyteller in this current musing. And this current musing that's coming up is going to be called Musing, a Storyteller Series, Miscellanea, Volume 2. And that is coming up at the Bluebarn on Wednesday, April 19th at 7:30 p.m. Admission is free, but
you have to reserve.
Reservations are encouraged because, as Seth said earlier, it is always a full house. There are usually people waiting, so make sure to reserve your seat, your free seat.
And does that happen at bluebarn.org? There's a link there for the seating, or...
Is it there's an Eventbrite link.
Eventbrite. Okay.
But yeah, you can also just get a hold of the theater directly. But again, we're already sold out for this event. So if you want to see it, come to the show the night of. Get on the waiting list. I'm sure we'll be able to find room for you.
Cool.
If not, just wait for the video to drop. But either way, check us out.
Absolutely.
Chris, you need to pitch a story.
I need to think of something.
I think it needs to be a pirate story.
I don't think so.
I would love a pirate story. I've never had a pirate story.
See,
a lot of that stuff is not fit for public consumption. It really isn't. I don't want to get you guys in trouble, or myself in trouble.
He doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't want people to know, huh?
No, or the authorities. So we'll just say that. But I want to make sure to mention that, of course, Laura Kelly is one of your storytellers, as is Elena Reeves, as is Jessica Corgi, and Timothy Guthrie. And all four, correct. Of course, as you say, 4 storytellers, 4 true stories, one night only. So thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And good luck. I know you're going to do great.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening and supporting the arts in the Platte River area and beyond. Please subscribe to our podcast so you are sure to catch all of our future episodes and join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on the Platte River Bard.